The roar of the engine was the only warning I had. Headlights blinded me as the truck swerved violently across the center line, aiming directly for my small sedan. In that frozen moment, with death rushing toward me at 70 miles per hour, I didn't scream or even close my eyes. Instead, my lips formed words I hadn't spoken in years. Holy Mother of Guadalupe, protect me. The impact never came. What happened next would change everything I believed about this world and what lies beyond. My name is Michael Ramirez, though most people just call me Mike. I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, in a neighborhood where faith was as much a part of daily life as the scorching summer heat. My abuela's house had an altar to La Virgen de Guadalupe that took up most of her living room wall. Candles always lit, fresh flowers replaced every Sunday after Mass. As a child, I'd watch her pray the rosary each evening, her weathered fingers moving methodically from bead to bead while she whispered in Spanish, words I couldn't fully understand but somehow felt in my bones. But like many young men, I drifted away from those traditions. College took me to Austin, where I studied business and technology. The digital world became my new religion, coding, startups, and the promise of Silicon Valley success. By 30, I'd achieved what most would consider the American dream: a senior position at a tech company, a modern home in the Texas Hill Country, and enough disposable income to indulge in whatever caught my fancy. Faith seemed like a relic of my childhood, something quaint that belonged to a different generation, a different time. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. I flew back to San Antonio for the funeral, sat through the Mass, and performed all the expected rituals. But it felt hollow, like I was an actor playing a part in someone else's story. The prayers were just words, the ceremonies just motions to go through. When my mother asked if I wanted any of Abuela's religious items, I politely declined. What use did I have for statues and prayer cards in my minimalist modern home? My cousin Julia took the Guadalupe altarpieces, tearfully promising to continue the family tradition. After the funeral, life resumed its predictable rhythm. Work conferences, business trips, casual relationships that never seemed to deepen into anything meaningful. I told myself I was living the good life, free from the constraints that had bound my parents and grandparents. Yet sometimes, in the quietest moments before dawn, I'd feel an emptiness that no career achievement or material possession could fill. Last month, I had to drive to Houston for a major client presentation. The meeting ran later than expected, and by the time I started the 3-hour drive back to Austin, night had fallen. I decided to take the back roads rather than the interstate, a decision that seemed insignificant at the time, but would prove to be divinely guided. The rural Texas highway stretched before me, a ribbon of black cutting through fields and farmland. Few cars passed, and the night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Texas sky like diamonds on black velvet. I was about an hour into my journey when my phone rang. The Bluetooth connected automatically, and my boss's voice filled the car. She was excited about the client's response to our presentation and wanted to discuss expanding the project scope. I was equally enthusiastic, already mentally calculating the additional revenue and what that would mean for my year-end bonus. "Hold on, Janet," I said, noticing the gas gauge dipping toward empty. "I need to stop for gas soon. This road doesn't have many stations." "No problem," she replied. "Just call me back tomorrow. And Mike, great job today. You really nailed it." I ended the call feeling that familiar rush of professional validation. Just ahead, I spotted the welcoming glow of a small gas station, its fluorescent lights creating an island of harsh brightness in the surrounding darkness. I pulled in, filled the tank, and went inside to grab a coffee for the remaining drive. The store was empty except for an elderly clerk behind the counter. He was a thin man, with skin like weathered leather, and he watched me with unusual intensity as I approached with my coffee. "Long drive ahead?" he asked, his accent thick with the border Spanish that reminded me of my grandfather. "Just heading back to Austin," I replied, handing him my credit card. He nodded slowly, then reached beneath the counter and pulled out something small. "Take this," he said, pressing it into my palm. It was a small medallion of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the familiar image of the Virgin, surrounded by golden rays. I started to protest, but he cut me off. "The roads are dangerous tonight," he said simply. "Take it. No charge." I felt awkward refusing, so I pocketed the medallion with a polite nod and left the store. Back in my car, I tossed it into the center console and promptly forgot about it. Just another strange encounter in a long day. The road seemed different after I left the gas station. The darkness felt heavier somehow, more oppressive. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, but could only find static on most stations. Finally, I caught a clear signal, an old Spanish hymn to the Virgin that my grandmother used to sing. I nearly changed it, then hesitated, allowing the hauntingly familiar melody to continue. It stirred memories I hadn't accessed in years. Sitting in Abuela's kitchen as she cooked and sang, the scent of candle wax and flowers from her altar, the feeling of absolute safety I'd experienced in her presence. The road curved sharply, pulling me from my reverie. I was now in a stretch of highway bordered by dense woods on both sides, the trees creating walls of impenetrable blackness. No houses, no other cars. Just me and the narrow band of asphalt illuminated by my headlights. I checked my GPS and frowned. This wasn't the route I'd planned to take. Somehow I'd turned onto a secondary road I didn't recognize. That's when I first noticed the truck. It appeared in my rearview mirror suddenly, as if materializing from the darkness itself. Its headlights were unusually bright, painfully so, making it difficult to see anything else. The truck stayed behind me, matching my speed exactly, maintaining a distance that was close enough to be intimidating, but not quite tailgating. I increased my speed slightly. The truck did the same. I slowed down, hoping it would pass. It slowed as well, maintaining that same unnerving distance. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I was being followed, deliberately and with purpose. My mind raced through the possibilities. Highway robbery was rare, but not unheard of on these isolated roads. Perhaps I'd unknowingly cut someone off earlier, and they were nursing a case of road rage. Or maybe it was nothing, just another traveler heading in the same direction who happened to be driving erratically. The next few minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The truck remained behind me, never varying its distance, never flashing its lights or giving any indication of the driver's intentions. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as tension built in my chest. I tried to control my breathing, to think rationally about my options. There were no turn-offs visible, no houses or businesses where I could seek help. My phone showed only one bar of service, enough to make a call in an emergency, but not reliable. Then, without warning, the truck accelerated. It pulled alongside my car, in the lane for oncoming traffic. In the dim light from my dashboard, I caught a glimpse of the driver. A silhouette only, featureless except for the gleam of eyes that seemed to reflect light like an animal's. The truck kept pace with me for a moment, two vehicles speeding side by side down the empty road. What happened next occurred with such suddenness that I had no time to react. The truck swerved toward me, forcing me to jerk the wheel sharply to avoid a collision. I skidded onto the shoulder, gravel pinging against my undercarriage, before managing to correct back onto the asphalt. The truck had pulled ahead and returned to its lane, but now it slowed dramatically, forcing me to brake hard to avoid hitting it. This was no accident, no random act of bad driving. I was being toyed with, deliberately terrorized on this empty stretch of road. Fear gave way to anger. I was not going to be victimized like this. At the next straight stretch, I pressed my accelerator to the floor, intending to speed past the truck and put as much distance between us as possible. It was a mistake. As soon as my car drew alongside, the truck swerved violently toward me. This time I couldn't avoid the impact. Metal screamed against metal as the truck's massive body slammed into my sedan. My car spun, tires fighting for traction on the asphalt. I barely managed to keep from flipping as I careened across the road and came to a stop facing the wrong direction, half on the shoulder, half in a shallow ditch. The engine was still running, but dashboard warning lights flashed angrily. Steam or smoke, I couldn't tell which in the darkness, rose from the crumpled hood. My door had been crushed inward, the window shattered. Shards of glass glittered on my lap and the seat beside me. By some miracle I was largely unhurt, a cut on my forehead sending a trickle of blood into my eye, and what would surely become bruises where the seatbelt had restrained me. Through the broken window, I watched in horror as the truck executed a tight U-turn and came to a stop about 50 yards away, its headlights now pointed directly at me, illuminating my disabled vehicle. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out into the beam of the headlights. He was tall and powerfully built, dressed entirely in black. The headlights behind him cast his face in shadow, but I could make out the gleam of something metallic in his hand. A knife, or perhaps a gun. He began walking toward my car with deliberate, unhurried steps, like a predator confident its prey had nowhere to escape. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, but it had been thrown from the center console during the crash. I spotted it on the passenger floorboard, screen shattered but still showing one bar of service. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911 and pressed the phone to my ear. Nothing. No ring, no dispatcher's voice. The call failed to connect. I tried again with the same result. The tenuous signal had either dropped completely or wasn't strong enough to place a call. The man was halfway to my car now. I tried the engine, praying it would still run despite the damage. It coughed, sputtered, but wouldn't turn over. I was trapped. With the man approaching and no help coming, survival instinct took over. If I couldn't drive away, I would have to run. The woods to my right offered the only possible shelter, a place to hide until help arrived or until I could make my way to safety. I unbuckled my seatbelt and tried to open my door, but it was jammed from the impact. The passenger door was my only option. I scrambled across the center console, ignoring the glass cutting into my palms. The passenger door opened with a reluctant creak. I tumbled out onto the ground, the cool night air filling my lungs as I gasped for breath. The man shouted something I couldn't understand and began to run toward me. I bolted for the tree line, pure adrenaline propelling me forward. The terrain was uneven, scattered with rocks and fallen branches that threatened to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear the heavy footfalls of my pursuer growing closer. He was faster, uninjured, and gaining ground with every second. The woods, which had seemed like safety from the road, now loomed before me like an impenetrable wall. In the moonless night, I could barely make out the trunks of the nearest trees, let alone what lay beyond them. Still, I had no choice. I plunged into the darkness, branches whipping at my face, thorny undergrowth tearing at my clothes and skin. I ran blindly, one arm raised to protect my face, the other extended to feel for obstacles. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give away my position. I could still hear him behind me, crashing through the undergrowth with far less caution than I was showing. "You can't run forever," he shouted, his voice echoing between the trees. "This only ends one way." I didn't waste breath responding. Every ounce of energy was focused on putting distance between us, on finding somewhere to hide or somehow circling back to the road where another car might pass. But the woods seemed endless, a labyrinth of identical trees and shadows that offered no landmark to orient myself. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, my shoulder slamming into the unyielding trunk of a massive oak. Pain exploded through my arm and chest. I bit back a cry, knowing any sound would lead him straight to me. For a moment I lay there, struggling to breathe through the pain, listening intently for my pursuer. The woods had gone silent. No footsteps, no breaking branches, no taunting calls. Had I lost him, or was he moving more carefully now, stalking me like the predator he was? Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself to my feet, using the oak for support. My right arm hung uselessly at my side. Not broken, I thought, but badly wrenched. I leaned against the tree, trying to gather my strength and decide what to do next. That's when I felt it, a strange warmth in my pocket. Confused, I reached in with my good hand and felt something hot to the touch. I pulled it out, squinting in the darkness. It was the Guadalupe medallion the old man at the gas station had given me. Impossibly, it was glowing, not reflecting light, but generating it, a soft, golden radiance that illuminated my hand and the ground at my feet. I stared at it in disbelief. This couldn't be real. I must have hit my head in the crash or the fall, and this was some kind of hallucination brought on by trauma. Yet the medallion continued to glow, growing brighter by the second, until it cast a circle of golden light several feet in diameter around me. "What the?" a voice said from behind me. I whirled around to find my attacker standing at the edge of the circle of light, his face finally visible. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with a sharp, angular face and eyes that reflected the medallion's light like a cat's. In his right hand, he held a hunting knife with a serrated blade. He stared at the glowing medallion, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What is that?" he demanded, gesturing with the knife. "Some kind of trick?" I couldn't answer. The medallion was now almost too bright to look at directly, its light expanding outward in pulsing waves. The man took a step back, raising his arm to shield his eyes. As he did, the light from the medallion seemed to coalesce, gathering itself into a defined shape between us. At first, it was just an outline, a silhouette of light hovering in the air. Then it took form, solidifying into the unmistakable image of a woman. She wore a flowing blue mantle decorated with stars, a rose-colored dress beneath. Her hands were clasped in prayer, her eyes downcast in an expression of infinite compassion. Around her, golden rays extended outward like the sun. La Virgen de Guadalupe, the same image from countless paintings and statues in my grandmother's home, the same figure imprinted on the medallion, but now life-sized and luminous, floating between me and my attacker. The man's face drained of color. His knife clattered to the forest floor as he staggered backward. "No," he whispered. "Not possible." The apparition didn't speak, didn't move, yet I felt a presence so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. A wave of warmth washed over me, easing the pain in my shoulder, calming the frantic beating of my heart. In that moment I knew with absolute certainty that I was safe, that no harm would come to me while she was present. My attacker had fallen to his knees, his face a mask of terror and awe. "I'm sorry," he was saying over and over, the words becoming a desperate litany. "Forgive me, Holy Mother, forgive me." The light from the apparition intensified, focusing on the kneeling man. He cried out not in pain, but in something closer to rapture, tears streaming down his face. "I see," he sobbed. "I understand now. Please forgive me." Idru, for how long we remained like this, the Virgin radiant between us, me standing transfixed, my attacker kneeling in supplication, I cannot say. Time seemed to stop, the moment extending beyond normal boundaries. I was aware only of the light, the warmth, and a profound sense of peace, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Then, as gradually as it had formed, the apparition began to fade. The light retreated, drawing back into the medallion in my hand, until only a faint glow remained. Darkness reclaimed the forest, though my eyes, adjusted to the brilliance, could now make out shapes and shadows more clearly than before. My attacker remained on his knees, head bowed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His knife lay forgotten on the ground beside him. I should have felt fear or rage toward this man who had tried to harm me, but instead I felt only compassion, a reflection of what I had just witnessed. "She saved us both tonight," I said softly. He looked up, his face transformed by whatever he had experienced. The predatory gleam was gone from his eyes, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "I've done terrible things," he said, his voice barely audible. "I thought there was no way back for me, no redemption possible. There's always a way back." I found myself saying, words rising from some deep well of understanding that hadn't been there before. She showed us that tonight. He nodded slowly, then reached into his shirt and pulled out a chain. Hanging from it was a tarnished silver cross. "My mother gave me this when I was confirmed," he said. "I haven't worn it in years, just couldn't bring myself to throw it away." His fingers closed around it tightly. "I need to make things right." "Starting now," I agreed. Together, we made our way back to the road. The night seemed less oppressive now, the path through the woods somehow easier to navigate. When we reached the road, we found both vehicles as we had left them. My sedan crumpled against the ditch, his truck idling on the shoulder, headlights still blazing. "I'll take you to the nearest town," he said. "There's a hospital there, and a police station." He hesitated. "I'll turn myself in. For everything." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his decision. Whatever crimes he had committed, and I suspected there were many, he was choosing a difficult path of atonement. The drive to the small town of Morales took about 20 minutes. We rode in silence, both of us processing what had happened in the woods. The medallion rested in my palm, cool now and ordinary-looking, though I knew it would never be just a piece of metal to me again. At the hospital, doctors treated my cuts and the shoulder strain, which turned out to be a minor separation that would heal with time. When they asked how I'd been injured, I simply said I'd been run off the road and crashed my car. It wasn't the whole truth, but I wasn't ready to share the full story, not with strangers who might dismiss it as shock or trauma-induced hallucination. True to his word, my attacker, whose name I learned was Ray Dominguez, went to the police station while I was being treated. He confessed to running me off the road as well as to other crimes, robberies along the rural highways of Texas, assaults, and even 2 murders. The local newspaper would later call him the Highway Phantom, who had terrorized the region for nearly 3 years. I was asked to give a statement about what had happened that night. I told them about being forced off the road, about fleeing into the woods. But when it came to what had happened there, I simply said that Dominguez had experienced some kind of religious conversion and decided not to harm me. The truth was mine, ours, to hold. Before he was taken away to a larger facility to await trial, Ray asked to speak with me one last time. We sat across from each other in a small room at the police station, a uniformed officer standing by the door. "I need you to know something," Ray said, leaning forward intently. "What we saw in those woods, that wasn't the first time for me." He glanced at the officer, then lowered his voice. 3 years ago, I was at rock bottom. Addicted, homeless, desperate. I was planning to rob a church in San Antonio, figured they'd have cash from donations, maybe some valuable items I could sell. I listened, not interrupting, sensing he needed to share this. It was a small church, Our Lady of Guadalupe on the west side. I broke in at night, thinking it would be empty. His eyes took on a faraway look. In the sanctuary, in front of the altar, there was an old woman praying the rosary. She should have been terrified when she saw me, but she wasn't. She looked at me with such kindness, such understanding. A chill ran down my spine. "What did she look like?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Small, with silver hair in a bun. She wore a blue dress with tiny flowers on it." He paused. "She spoke to me in Spanish, called me Hijo, son. She said she had been waiting for me, that the Virgin had told her I would come. She gave me food, money from her own purse, and a medallion just like yours." My heart seemed to stop. "What was her name?" "Ramirez," he said. "Elena Ramirez. She made me promise to change my life, said the Virgin had special plans for me. But I didn't listen. I took what she gave me and went right back to my old ways." His voice broke. "Until tonight, when I saw that same medallion glowing in your hand, when I saw the Virgin herself standing before me, and I knew this was my last chance." Elena Ramirez, my grandmother's name, the same grandmother who had passed away 3 years ago. "The medal," I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. "What happened to it?" Ray looked down at his hands. I pawned it for drug money the next day. It was the worst thing I've ever done, worse than all the rest. I think that's why she came to us in the woods, to bring me full circle, to give me one more chance to choose the right path. I sat back, overwhelmed. Had my grandmother somehow known? Had the Virgin truly spoken to her, told her about a man who would come to the church with evil intentions? And had she known somehow that our paths would cross years later on a dark Texas road? After Ray was transferred to the county jail, I returned to the small gas station where the old clerk had given me the medallion. I needed to thank him, to tell him what had happened. But when I arrived, I found the building boarded up, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. According to a local who stopped to ask if I needed help, the station had been closed for over a year. The old man who owned it had died, and no one had wanted to take over the business in such a remote location. I stood there staring at the abandoned building, the medallion warm in my hand. Another impossibility in a night filled with them. Yet somehow it made perfect sense. The old man, my grandmother, the Virgin herself, all had been guiding me, protecting me, preparing me for what would happen on that lonely road. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn back to the faith of my childhood. I began attending Mass at a small church near my home in Austin, awkwardly at first, then with growing comfort as familiar rituals awakened dormant memories. I retrieved my grandmother's personal Bible and rosary from my mother, who wept with joy when I told her I wanted them. I visited Ray in prison several times. His face showed more peace each time I saw him. He was cooperating fully with authorities, helping them solve cold cases, bringing closure to families who had lost loved ones to his violence. He spoke often of the vision in the woods, of the overwhelming love and forgiveness he had felt in the presence of the Virgin. "I'll spend the rest of my life in here," he told me during one visit, "and that's just. But I'm free now, in a way I never was before." 3 months after that night, I returned to the stretch of road where it had all happened. The local church in Morales had erected a small shrine at the spot where my car had crashed. Word had somehow spread about an apparition of the Virgin, though the details remained vague and unofficial. I found fresh flowers laid at the foot of the shrine, candles flickering in the afternoon sun. I knelt there, the medallion around my neck now, and offered a prayer of gratitude. As I did, a family pulled up in a minivan, parents and 3 young children. They approached the shrine tentatively, the mother holding the youngest child in her arms. "Excuse me, sir," the father said to me. "Do you know the story of this place? Our daughter has been very ill, and we heard that prayers offered here have special power." I looked at the little girl in her mother's arms, at the hope in their eyes. Did I know the story of this place? Yes, I knew it in my bones, in my soul. "Let me tell you what happened here," I began, my hand reaching for the medallion that hung warm against my chest. "It's a story about darkness and light, about second chances and the enduring power of faith." As I spoke, sharing my testimony with this family who needed their own miracle, I felt a gentle breeze that seemed to carry the scent of candle wax and flowers. My grandmother's altar brought to life once more. And I knew with absolute certainty that the Mother of God still walks among us, still reaches out her hands to guide us home. In the year that followed my encounter on that dark Texas road, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The tech company that had once been the center of my existence now seemed like just a job, important, but no longer defining who I was. I continued my work there, but with a new perspective that puzzled my colleagues. The ruthless ambition that had marked my climb up the corporate ladder gave way to something more measured, more compassionate. "You've changed," my boss Janet remarked during my annual review. Despite my shifted priorities, my performance numbers were actually better than ever. "You're calmer, more focused. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." What I was doing couldn't be captured in corporate language or performance metrics. Each morning before dawn, I spent time in prayer with my grandmother's rosary beads moving through my fingers. Each Sunday found me at Mass, no longer just going through motions, but experiencing the liturgy as something alive and meaningful. And twice a month, I made the 3-hour drive to visit Ray in prison, our unlikely friendship deepening with each conversation. Ray's case had attracted some media attention. The highway phantom finding religion and confessing to his crimes made for compelling headlines. Most stories portrayed his conversion skeptically, suggesting it was a ploy for leniency. But those who knew him, including the prison chaplain and even some of the guards, saw the genuine transformation in him. "I dream about her sometimes," Ray told me during one visit, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "La Virgen. In my dreams, she shows me things, my victims, their families. She doesn't speak, but somehow I understand what she wants from me." "What does she want?" I asked. "To make amends, as much as possible in this life. To bring healing where I caused pain." His eyes, once cold and predatory, now held a depth of sorrow and resolve that couldn't be faked. "I've been writing letters to the families when they're willing to receive them. Not asking forgiveness, I have no right to that, but acknowledging the pain I caused, giving them whatever closure I can." Some of those families had begun to visit Ray as well, participating in a restorative justice program the prison offered. A few even wrote to me, seeking to understand the night that had changed everything. I shared what I could, what felt right to share, always sensing that the full story of the Virgin's appearance was meant to be revealed gradually to those prepared to receive it. 6 months after my encounter, I received a letter from a woman named Lucia Vega, who identified herself as the daughter of the gas station owner who had given me the medallion. "My father passed away 15 months ago," she wrote. "The night before he died, he told me a strange story. He said the Virgin had appeared to him in a dream and instructed him to give a blessed medallion to a man who would stop at the station the following evening. He described you exactly, your height, your business clothes, even the small scar above your right eyebrow. He said the medallion would save your life and the life of another man whose soul hung in the balance." Her letter continued. "I thought it was just the rambling of an old man near death. But 3 days after his funeral, when I was clearing out the station, I found his journal. He had written about the dream in detail, including the exact date it would happen, the day you stopped for gas. The station had already been closed for months by then, the property sold to a developer. There's no way he could have been there to give you anything." I read and reread her letter, the medallion warm against my skin where I now wore it always. Another impossibility, another miracle. I arranged to meet Lucia, to show her the medallion, to compare the timing of her father's death with my experience. We both wept as the pieces came together, revealing a pattern of divine intervention that had been set in motion long before that night on the road. My father was a simple man, deeply devout, Lucia told me over coffee in a small San Antonio cafe. In his last years after my mother died, his faith became even more central to his life. He would spend hours in prayer at the church of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the same church, I realized with a start, where my grandmother had prayed, where Ray had encountered her 3 years ago. Lucia reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn journal. "This was his. I want you to have it. I think it was meant for you all along." The journal documented the spiritual journey of Hector Vega over the last 5 years of his life. Most entries were simple. Reflections on scripture, prayers for his family, notes about his daily struggles and joys. But scattered throughout were accounts of dreams and visions, including several appearances of the Virgin of Guadalupe. "She comes to me when I am between sleep and waking," he wrote in one entry. "Her presence fills the room with the scent of roses. She speaks not with words, but directly to my heart, and I understand her perfectly." Many of the visions seemed personal, meant solely for Hector's spiritual guidance, but others hinted at a larger purpose. 3 years before my encounter, he had written, The lady showed me a young man in darkness, his soul heavy with terrible sins. She says he will come to her church seeking to steal, but will instead encounter one of her faithful servants. The servant will plant a seed that will not bear fruit immediately, but will eventually lead to his salvation. Ray. It had to be describing Ray's encounter with my grandmother, and then, just days before Hector's death, the final entry. She came with great urgency tonight. I saw a man in danger on a dark road, pursued by evil. The lady showed me that I must give him the blessed medallion, though I do not understand how this will be possible. She says arrangements have been made, that I should trust and obey. Arrangements had been made. Those words haunted me. What kind of arrangements could bridge the gap between death and life, allowing a deceased man to appear to me, solid and real, in a gas station that no longer operated? The question led me deeper into the mysteries of faith, into regions of spiritual reality I had never considered in my former life of practical materialism. As my journey continued, I felt drawn to learn more about the history of Our Lady of Guadalupe, about the original miracle in 1531 when she appeared to the indigenous peasant Juan Diego on Tepeyac Hill near Mexico City. I read about the miraculous image imprinted on his tilma, a cloak made of cactus fiber that should have deteriorated within decades, but instead has remained intact for nearly 5 centuries, defying scientific explanation. I learned about the countless miracles attributed to her intercession through the centuries, healings, conversions, protection during natural disasters and wars. What had happened to me on that Texas road was not an isolated incident, but part of a continuous thread of divine intervention stretching back through time. This understanding deepened when, about 8 months after my encounter, I made a pilgrimage to the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. Standing before the original miraculous image displayed high above the altar, I felt a connection to all who had stood in that same spot through the centuries, seeking comfort, guidance, or healing from the Mother of God. The basilica was crowded with pilgrims from around the world, many approaching the shrine on their knees, tears streaming down their faces as they gazed up at the image. I joined the slow-moving line that passed beneath the tilma, allowing each visitor a moment of proximity to the miracle. As my turn came, I looked up at the image, the gentle face of the Virgin, her hands clasped in prayer, the golden rays surrounding her, and felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. This was the same presence I had encountered in the Texas woods, the same compassion that had transformed both Ray and me that night. I hadn't planned to do so, but I found myself sinking to my knees right there in the basilica, overcome with emotion. The medallion at my chest grew warm, and for a moment, just a moment, I caught the scent of roses, though there were none visible nearby. "She's acknowledging you," a voice said softly beside me. I turned to see an elderly priest, his weathered face kind and knowing. He helped me to my feet as those behind me continued past the shrine. "You've seen her," the priest continued. "It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. She has revealed herself to you directly." "Yes," I admitted, surprised by his certainty. "How did you know?" He smiled. "I've been serving at this basilica for 43 years. I've learned to recognize the look in the eyes of those she has touched personally." He gestured toward a side chapel. "Come, let us talk for a moment." In the relative quiet of the chapel, I found myself sharing the full story with this stranger. The attack, the apparition, Ray's conversion, the impossible medallion given by a man who had already died. The priest, Father Domingo, listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if nothing I said surprised him. "Your story is extraordinary in its details," he said when I had finished, "but not in its essence. The Mother comes to those in greatest need, often when they are furthest from faith, and she often works through a chain of individuals, each playing their part in a divine plan they may not fully comprehend. He went on to share other accounts he had heard through the years, apparitions, interventions, inexplicable protections. Some had been documented and investigated by church authorities, others remained private testimonies like mine. The church is cautious about declaring such experiences miraculous, as it should be, Father Domingo explained. But that does not make them less real for those who experience them. The important question is always, what fruit does the experience bear? Does it lead to greater faith, to conversion of heart, to works of mercy and compassion? By that standard, the miracle on the Texas road had borne abundant fruit. Ray's dramatic conversion and ongoing journey of atonement. My return to faith and the new purpose I had found. The families of Ray's victims finding unexpected paths to healing. And something else that had begun to take shape in my life, something I had only recently recognized as a calling. I had started spending my weekends volunteering at a rehabilitation center in East Austin, working with men recently released from prison. Many were like Ray had been, hardened by life, skeptical of second chances, distrustful of anyone offering help without obvious self-interest. But something in my own story, in the genuine transformation they sensed in me, began to break through those barriers. "You actually believe people can change," one man told me after several weeks of attending the program. "Most people say it, but you believe it down to your bones. Makes a difference." That difference was the Virgin's doing, not mine. I was simply a conduit for the same compassion and hope she had shown to me in my moment of greatest need. When I returned from Mexico City, I found an email waiting from Janet, my boss. The company was planning to open a new office in San Antonio, and she wanted me to head it up. "You're from there originally, right?" she wrote. "We need someone with local connections who understands the culture. Plus, I think you'd enjoy being closer to family." The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence. I'd been feeling increasingly called to deepen my work with former inmates, to perhaps establish a more formal program based on principles of restorative justice. San Antonio, with its strong Catholic community and its proximity to several state correctional facilities, would be the ideal location. Within 2 months, I had relocated to a modest home in the neighborhood where I grew up, just 3 blocks from my mother's house and the church where my grandmother had prayed. The corporate office took up my weekdays, but my real work, my vocation, happened evenings and weekends at a community center space donated by the diocese. We called it Guadalupe House, and its mission was simple: to provide support, resources, and spiritual guidance for men and women rebuilding their lives after incarceration. We offered job training, counseling, addiction recovery support, and perhaps most importantly, a community where transformation was not just possible, but expected. Ray contributed from prison, writing curriculum for our life skills classes, sharing insights from his own journey that resonated powerfully with those facing similar struggles. Several families of victims became involved as well, bringing a perspective of forgiveness and reconciliation that no professional counselor could provide. The medallion remained my constant companion, though it never again glowed with supernatural light as it had that night in the woods. Still, its presence reminded me daily of the thin veil between the natural and supernatural worlds, and of the mother whose love had saved not just my physical life, but my spiritual one as well. On the anniversary of my encounter, a date I now observed as a personal holy day, I drove back to the shrine that had been erected at the site. It had grown over the year, with a small enclosed structure protecting the candles and offerings from the elements, and a modest statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe watching over the spot where my car had crashed. I wasn't the only visitor that day. A dozen or more people had gathered, some kneeling in prayer, others simply standing in reverent silence. Among them, I was surprised to see Lucia Vega, her father's journal clutched to her chest. "I didn't expect to find you here," I said when she noticed me. She smiled. "I come every month, but today felt especially important." As we talked, others approached, drawn by some unspoken recognition that we were connected to the story of this place. One elderly couple had brought their grandson, who used a wheelchair. "He was in a car accident 6 months ago," the grandmother explained. "The doctors said he would never walk again. But after we prayed here last month, feeling has returned to his legs. The doctors can't explain it." A young woman overhead and joined our circle. "The same thing happened to my sister," she said. "Not walking, she had cancer. Terminal, they said. We came here to pray." And at her next scan, the tumors had shrunk by half. 3 months later, they were gone completely. More people gathered, each with a story to share. A marriage restored after years of estrangement. An addiction overcome when all previous attempts at recovery had failed. A moment of divine protection during a violent storm. Some of the accounts involved dramatic interventions like mine, while others spoke of quieter miracles, inner healing, renewed hope, a sense of peace that surpassed understanding. As I listened, I realized that what had happened to me was part of something much larger than I had understood. The Virgin's appearance on that Texas road wasn't just about saving me from Ray, or saving Ray from himself. It was one thread in a vast tapestry of divine action in the world, a reminder that the membrane between heaven and earth is permeable, that the Mother of God continues to reach through that veil to guide, protect, and heal her children. A local priest arrived as the informal gathering grew, and someone suggested we pray the rosary together. As we moved through the familiar prayers, decades marking the joyful, sorrowful, glorious, and luminous mysteries of Christ's life, I felt a deep sense of connection to my grandmother, who had prayed these same words thousands of times in her life, to the others gathered at the shrine whose lives had been touched by the Virgin's intercession, to countless believers through the centuries who had turned to Mary in their hour of need. After the rosary, Father Martinez blessed the shrine and those gathered with holy water. As the droplets touched my forehead, I closed my eyes and once again caught the faint scent of roses. When I opened them for just an instant, I thought I saw a shimmer of blue and gold at the edge of the gathering, gone so quickly I might have imagined it, except for the collective gasp from several others who had seen the same thing. The priest smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Some mysteries were meant to remain just that, mysteries apprehended by faith rather than explained by reason. As the gathering dispersed, several people approached me, asking if I would share my story of what had happened at this place. I did so simply, focusing not on the supernatural elements, but on the transformation that had followed, the fruits of the encounter that continued to manifest in my life and Ray's. One young man listened more intently than the others. When the crowd thinned, he drew me aside. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been planning to end my life. Everything's fallen apart. My marriage, my job, my health. I came here today because I'd heard stories about miracles, but I didn't really believe them. I just wanted one last chance to see if there was anything to all this faith stuff before I—" He didn't finish the sentence. "And now?" I asked gently. "Now I don't know," he admitted. "Listening to you, to all these people, it's like waking up from a nightmare and realizing there might be light after all, that I'm not alone in the darkness." I recognized in his eyes the same desperation I had seen in Ray's that night in the woods, the same hunger for hope that had brought me back to faith after years of empty success. I reached for the medallion around my neck, unclasping it for the first time since Lucia had confirmed its miraculous origins. "Take this," I said, pressing it into his palm just as Hector Vega had done for me at the gas station that impossible night. "The Virgin has a purpose for your life, one you can't yet see, but she sees it, and she's reaching out to you right now." He stared at the medallion, then back at me. "I can't take this. It's obviously precious to you." I smiled. It was never mine to keep, only to pass along when the time came. And the time has come. As he closed his fingers around the medallion, his shoulders straightened slightly, as if some invisible burden had begun to lift. We exchanged phone numbers, and I invited him to visit Guadalupe House whenever he was ready. He promised he would come. Driving home that evening, I felt lighter myself, despite having given away the physical token of my miracle. The real miracle had never been the medallion itself, but the connection it represented, the loving presence of the Mother of God reaching into the darkest moments of human experience, bringing light, hope, and the possibility of transformation. I understood now why my grandmother had spent so many hours before her altar, why generations of the faithful had processed on their knees toward the tilma in Mexico City, why pilgrims continued to visit shrines like the one on that rural Texas road. They weren't seeking magic or easy answers, but rather a reminder that we are never truly alone in our suffering, that divine love surrounds us, even, perhaps especially, in our darkest hours. My phone rang as I neared San Antonio, the caller ID showing an unfamiliar number from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Concerned, I answered immediately. "Mr. Ramirez," a woman's voice said. "This is Chaplain Torres from the Huntsville unit. I'm calling about Raymond Dominguez." My heart raced. Had something happened to Ray? "Is he all right?" "He's fine," she assured me quickly. "More than fine, actually. I'm calling because something extraordinary happened during our prayer service this evening, and he asked me to contact you right away." She explained that during a special mass for the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which I suddenly realized was today's date, Ray had experienced what she carefully termed a significant spiritual event. He was praying before a painting of the Virgin when other inmates noticed a light surrounding him, the chaplain said, her voice measured but unable to fully conceal her amazement. Several witnesses, including myself and 2 guards, observed what appeared to be the scent of roses filling the chapel. Ray himself reported, she hesitated, that he saw her. I finished for her. "The Virgin of Guadalupe." "Yes," she confirmed. "He said she came to tell him that his journey of atonement has been accepted, that he should continue his work of reconciliation from within the prison, and he said there was a message for you as well." I pulled over to the side of the road, knowing instinctively that this was not something to hear while driving. "What's the message?" "He said you would understand it." The exact words were, "Tell Michael the chain is unbroken. The medal has found its new bearer. Now he must look for the next link." Tears filled my eyes as I realized Ray somehow knew I had passed the medallion to someone new, continuing the chain of divine intervention that had included my grandmother, Hector Vega, myself, and now this young man contemplating suicide. Each of us had been broken in different ways, each touched by the Virgin's compassion, each called to become a vessel of that same compassion for others. "Thank you, Chaplain," I managed to say. "Please tell Ray I received the message and I understand, and I'll visit him as soon as they'll allow it." After ending the call, I sat in silence as night fell around me, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Texas sky. In that moment, I felt a certainty beyond words, beyond rational explanation, that the Mother of God was indeed active in the world, that her compassionate presence continued to break through the veil separating heaven and earth, that ordinary people like my grandmother and Hector Vega and Ray and myself could be drawn into her work of bringing light to darkness. I thought of the young man who now carried the medallion, wondering what miracle awaited him, what transformation would unfold in his life. And I thought of all those who had gathered at the shrine today, whose lives had been touched in ways both dramatic and subtle by the Virgin's intercession. The chain was unbroken, the work continued. And somewhere on another lonely road, in another moment of desperation, the mother's love would reveal itself again, perhaps through the medallion, perhaps through some other means, bringing hope where hope seemed impossible, light where darkness appeared absolute. I started my car and continued toward San Antonio, toward home, toward the next chapter of this unfolding miracle. As I drove, I found myself whispering a prayer of gratitude for that terrifying night that had become paradoxically the greatest blessing of my life. "Thank you, Mother of Guadalupe," I said softly. "For the medal, for the miracle, for the mission, I am yours." Have you experienced moments of divine intervention in your own life? Perhaps not as dramatic as an apparition, but those times when you felt protected, guided, or comforted by a presence greater than yourself? Share your story in the comments, and remember that faith opens our eyes to miracles happening all around us every day. If this testimony touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are never truly alone.